Once the public saw this picture, nobody could believe that Davis was anything other than a cold-blooded killer. A freelance photographer working for the New York Post newspaper named Umar Abbasi was walking down the stairs of the 49th Street subway station in New York City. This very busy station is located only a few blocks away from the very famous Times Square. And so after Umar made his way down to this underground subway station, he walked over to one of the big automated kiosks that looks like an ATM, and he purchased a subway ticket. And then with his ticket, he walked over to the turnstiles. He slid his ticket through the slot, pushed past the turnstiles, and was now standing out on the actual train platform. And from where Umar was standing, this platform basically was like a huge sidewalk that stretched all the way to his right a couple hundred feet and all the way to his left a couple hundred feet. And in front of this platform were the actual tracks down below, because the train, when it came out of the tunnel, it would actually come right up alongside this platform with almost no clearance between the platform and the train. As such, the leading edge of the platform, basically the lip of the train platform that's closest to the train tracks, has this big yellow line painted all across it to keep commuters from standing too close to the edge, because if a train came through, they could actually get hit by the train. And so as Umar is standing on this platform and he's looking left and right, it's totally crowded with people, and they're all kind of tucked back against the wall away from this yellow line. And so Umar decides he's going to turn right and wait at the right end of the platform, just because he saw down at the far end there appeared to be a gap in people, and he figured he could stand right there. And so Umar begins navigating past all of these people on the right side of the platform, and for the most part, everyone he is passing either has their head buried in their phone, or they're listening to music, or both. Because the thing about riding trains, especially trains in busy cities, is none of the commuters want to talk to anybody else. They want to be completely left alone. And so as Umar is walking, everyone was basically doing that. But at some point, he did pass two people that were engaged in a pretty heated conversation. Umar had no idea what they were arguing about, or if they were even arguing at all. He didn't know who these people were, but he took mental note of the fact that two men were kind of bickering with each other. And so he walked past them, didn't give it much of a second thought, and he arrived at a gap in the gaggle of people waiting for the train. And there he just stood well back of the yellow line, where he pulled out his camera and began clicking through the images he had taken earlier in the day at an earlier photo shoot. And so as he's clicking through these pictures, he starts to notice that those two men who had been bickering before are now straight up yelling at each other. They're screaming obscenities at each other. It's not clear who's fighting about what or who was the aggressor, but it's very obvious that at this point they're fighting. And so Umar looked away from his camera and looked left down the platform towards these two guys. And so these two guys are about 100 to 125 feet away from him. And all the people that were standing in the vicinity of these two men are beginning to migrate away from them. They just don't want anything to do with them. Because the thing about being in subways, especially in cities like New York, is there's lots of people that go down into these train stations that are inebriated or mentally unstable. And so very strange and bad behavior is just kind of a normal thing, and people tend to just kind of ignore it. And so Umar spent a couple more seconds staring down the platform at these two men, but eventually just shrugged and thought, you know what, whatever problems they have, they're not mine. And so Umar went back to his camera and continued to click through his pictures, when all of a sudden he hears a scream coming from the left side of the platform. But it was not a scream that sounded like it came from either of these two men. And so Umar looked up from his camera and looked left down the platform, and now he just sees chaos. It's people running away from these two men. People are running to get away from whatever is happening around them. And so Umar's thinking these men must have come to blows, and they're now fighting actively, physically with each other. But when finally the crowd kind of cleared for a second, he saw a woman pointing down at the train tracks right in front of where those two men had been standing. And so Umar looks at the woman and he follows her finger down onto the tracks, and he sees there is now a man, one of the two men who had been fighting, laying face down on the train tracks. And then, to Umar's horror, he looks up down the tunnel where the train would come out of, and he sees the headlights of the train. It is now coming into the station. And so Umar starts running down the platform to try to get to this man to pull him out of the tracks. And as he's running, he pulls out his camera and he turns the flash on and he holds the shutter down and he aims it at the train conductor to hope the flashing of his camera will alert the train conductor to put on the emergency brake and stop the train before he hits this guy down on the tracks. And so as Umar is running, trying to signal this train conductor, the man down on the tracks tries to stand up, and Umar sees he's really struggling to stand, and when he finally gets up, he turns and he grabs the edge of the platform and he tries to pull himself up and out of the tracks, but he doesn't have the strength or the coordination, and as Umar is getting closer and closer, but he's still too far away to help, he sees that this guy down on the tracks is not going to be able to get out of there before the train hits him. And so Umar finally comes to a stop and he watches as this man down on the tracks lets go of the lip of this platform and just turns and faces the train like he knows what's about to happen. And then seconds later, the train, although it did try to stop, impacted this man and killed him instantly. The man's name was Kai-Suk Han, and he was 58 years old. When the police finally showed up, they arrested the other man who Han had been fighting with. He was a 30-year-old named Naeem Davis, and Davis would actually tell police that he had been fighting with Han and he had pushed him onto the tracks, but it was in self-defense. However, that self-defense story didn't stop him from being charged with murder. While Davis sat in jail waiting for his trial, the media and the public at large had already come to the conclusion that Davis was guilty. And this was due in large part to a particular picture. As Umar was running down the platform, holding up his camera, holding the flash down, trying to flag the train conductor to get him to stop, Umar was also taking dozens and dozens of pictures. And those pictures were of Han right before he was struck by the train. And so after Umar ultimately discovered he had taken these pictures, he gave them to his employer, the New York Post newspaper, and the day after the incident, they ran on the front page a picture of Han right before he's about to be killed with the headline, "Doomed." And so once the public saw this picture, nobody could believe that Davis was anything other than a cold-blooded killer for pushing this poor innocent man onto the tracks. But as it would turn out, nearly 5 years later, when Davis did finally get his trial, he was acquitted of all charges because it turned out Han was very and had picked a fight with Davis, and Davis was filmed on more than one occasion on the platform trying to get Han to leave him alone. And so finally, after Han began making death threats and then grabbed Davis's shoulder, Davis turned around and pushed him, and Han, being stumbled and fell backwards onto the tracks and then was ultimately killed. Here is the infamous photo of Han on the cover of the New York Post newspaper.